Welcome to Ponchatoula Live, the show where we make it easy for you to connect with the people of Ponchatoula. I'm your host, Parker Layrisson, and today I've got a truly terrific guest. This is not only one of the most preeminent people in our local community, one of the highest ranking public officials we have that lives here in Ponchatoula, but he's also a dear friend of mine. We go way back, and I'm speaking, of course, about Judge Jeff Johnson. Judge, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Parker. Good to be here, man. Looking forward to it. I'm glad I finally made the cut. I've been watching it for years, and I finally got to be here.
Well, you have long been on the list. We've talked about it for years, and you're a busy man. I'm glad we were able to make the schedules work. I think folks knew you in your capacity here as a local attorney whose practice was just mere blocks from mine. But of course, you've now been on the bench with the 21st Judicial District for years. But before we kind of get into your current job and the day to day of that, why don't we just kick things off with you telling us a little bit about yourself personally?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm from Ruston. I grew up in Ruston, Louisiana. I was born in Shreveport, but grew up and graduated from Ruston High. Still check the football scores every Saturday morning. They're currently undefeated. They just thrashed the number one team in 4A Texas last Saturday afternoon. So,
well, it's good that one team you root for is winning because
that's right.
PHS
Plus the Bearcats a little
year.
bit. The Tigers are finding some way to win, but we'll see if that continues Saturday night. Went to law school down at LSU, then went to the DA's office in New Orleans and just never made my way back up north. All three of my boys were born and raised here in Ponchatoula. I practiced here for a long time. And in fact, I think you know this, but my house is now where my office was. I've converted that back into a residence and live there. And, Ponchatoula is my home. I love it. I've lived in Springfield, Kentwood, different parts of our district, but Ponchatoula is certainly what I call home. And what my boys call home as well.
Well, we're proud to have you there. And of course, I remember that you got elected out of Ponchatoula. You were living here in Ponchatoula when you won. I had the pleasure and the honor to help you with your campaign. And it was a landslide win. You did great. So you mentioned, those early years in Ruston and you went to college up North Louisiana, then to LSU for law school. When you got to LSU law, what was your thinking at that point? Did you know then you'd want to don the robe one day and be where you are here today? Or what was the process like you from law school in the 90s to the bench today?
Yeah, I mean, I think my journey is I never even went to law school to practice law, Parker. When I was at Centenary and entered my senior year, it's a small school. You had an advisor, and they were much more active than maybe Southeastern or LSU in the sense that we spoke to our advisors on a regular basis. And at that time, I think there may have been a movement in that a law degree served you possibly better than an MBA or maybe some master's degree. So the reason I went to law school was to ultimately go into the business community. My father had a furniture store and had eventually sold out in Mr. Smith, Ivan Smith. I think he probably has somewhere around 60 stores now, but I had intended to go back to work there. The fall of my freshman year, I lived in downtown Baton Rouge on Spanish Town Road, just a few blocks from the Capitol. And I had a young puppy, Doberman, that I'd been given for graduation, and she got stolen. And I was in criminal law class, and I looked up, and the theft of a dog, if you look it up, I think it's still there, some 67 point something. It's a misdemeanor to steal a man's dog, and I thought that was just criminal. No pun intended. And it just kind of turned me on to the idea of criminal law. And I played golf in college, and that's a sport where you really kind of compete with yourself in the field. And being a trial lawyer is similar. It's based on competition, and there's a lot of dealing with the same type of thing. So that's eventually how I decided to become a lawyer and, in fact, a prosecutor, which I was for 20 years in New Orleans as well as up here.
Well, you make an interesting point about competing with yourself because, everybody grows up watching courtroom drama, movies, TV shows, etc. They're familiar with the concept of a plaintiff, a defendant, or a prosecutor, a defendant, winners and losers. But those of us that practice law realize that, you're really competing with yourself and the best outcome you can get for your client. You can have a case where technically the plaintiff wins, but if they win a low amount, that's really a loss. You could do a terrible job and quote win. But I imagine it's a lot like golf in that, here's what I should be shooting on this course, the course of this. And you test yourself against that, not necessarily the guy you're golfing with that day. because if he's terrible, of course you beat him. You should have
Right.
beat him, right? So that's an interesting origin story there. Losing a dog. I think
It is. It is.
I've heard
And the rest of that story is I got her back. I put out a reward, and it turns out that some guys that were probably involved in the distribution of cocaine had taken her, and she was tied to a doorknob. One end of a wire clothes hanger was around the doorknob, and the other end was around her neck. I grew up in Ruston, in
Wow.
the '80s. I was naive, but I now, looking back with my experience, I know what was inside that closet.
Yeah.
I guess God was watching over me. Those dealers did not happen to be there at the time I retrieved her.
Yeah, thank God. But well, let's talk criminal law a little bit, because that's been such a huge part of your career. Of course, you've done the civil stuff like I do, from car wrecks, and you did real estate closings and much more. But I know criminal has been a passion of yours as a prosecutor for the New Orleans years, and also your Tangipahoa and Livingston years. And today we had the Rotary, and I had a prosecutor that works in your court, Taylor Anthony, as my guest speaker, and he really made a compelling case for the importance of that job. He warned us of the fentanyl crisis that's out there, that's really terrorizing families through overdoses and the problems that it causes. But once you got past the origin story of losing a dog, noticing that the punishment doesn't really fit the crime on the statute, what was the journey like? Because you mentioned you started in New Orleans, and as I understand it, prosecutors go to New Orleans to train and start their careers for the same reason that trauma surgeons go down there. There's a lot of shootings and stuff like that. So what was it like in New Orleans, and then what was it like up here as a prosecutor, and what did you learn along the way?
I worked for Harry Connick, so we're stretching back. I'm starting to show my age, I guess. But in a little over 2 years, Parker, I tried over 100 jury trials in New Orleans.
Wow.
So it truly is, and you have an idea of what that looks like. I mean, people who practice outside of that community don't try, maybe don't try 25 or 50 in a lifetime, much less.
Well, and I'll give you an example of that. Your classmate, our mutual friend, Judge Daryl Papillon on the federal bench. I remember when he got confirmed last year in the news article, they talked about how many cases he tried. Daryl taught me trial advocacy 20 years ago. He's one of the best civil trial lawyers the state's seen in our careers, but he had tried fewer than 50 to a jury. And so you're talking about tremendous numbers that you can really only do if you prosecute or work as a public defender. You can't see that kind of volume in the civil side.
No, I don't think not only can you not see that kind of volume, you can't see that kind of volume in I would call us maybe a suburban area now, but you can only see that in what I would call an inner city area, like New Orleans, Detroit, Chicago, maybe the Bronx, some of those, Cleveland, Miami, some of those places where, the numbers of crimes that are occurring, and a lot of that's dope driven, whether it be the dealer, the addict, or the burglaries, the thefts that derive out of that. You just don't have the numbers that are that can equate to that kind of experience. And some of that experience is great. Some of it's not. I mean, you have a tendency to maybe learn bad habits because you're getting through the system so much. But back to your original question, I think, Parker, and I think you grow as a person. I know you're a father now, and several years into that, I know your perspective on life just is transformed from what it was prior to life.
Right.
I mean, prior to your children. And certainly my children and the benefit of age changed my perspective of what I did as a prosecutor. But that position, I get to make the ultimate decision in some regards on cases, maybe from a sentencing perspective, or some evidentiary rulings. But the job that Taylor had, and that I formerly held for 20 years, has a lot more power than the job of a judge, because there's so much discretion in what happens to the charge at all. In terms of, does it get charged? Does it not get charged? If charged, what does it happen? How do you choose to use people's prior poor choices against them? There's just, they have a whole lot more encompassing grip on the outcome of people's lives. And I think that's probably what differs maybe a little from criminal and civil. And maybe what I was drawn to is it's real. It has real impact. It's truly throwing a rock into the pond. I mean, these people's lives, victims and defendants' lives, are getting impacted and altered in very significant and permanent ways, depending on what that outcome is.
Well, and I mentioned this today when I introduced Taylor. My dear friend Will Richardson was there with me, and what really opened my eyes to the job that we're talking about here, assistant district attorney, prosecutor, felony criminal court. When I was 21 years old, a senior at Tulane, one of my best friends was killed in a drug deal on the southeastern campus. And my dad had been sheriff for probably 20 years at that point, my entire life, basically. My brother was already a young cop. You would think I'd be really aware of criminal justice, but it was never really real because we weren't victims of crimes. But when you lose somebody, and I was actually with my friend's, mother this morning, and we were chatting about that horrible day in life. But it's just, that's when things get real. And while the police have an incredibly important job, a dangerous job, a difficult job, they can't take that criminal case across the finish line, right? They don't make the big decision. They may arrest you and cuff you and stuff you and put you in the jail, but it's the DA's job to decide, one, should they stay there, how to charge the crime, and then they got to make it happen. Often in the face of a constitution that makes their job really difficult, highly compensated defense lawyers, especially in the dope game, that are looking for any little loophole they can. And it's just incredibly important. And I'll be candid, even with a sheriff daddy and a cop brother, I didn't get that until it happened to one of my very best friends. All the Law and Order episodes in the world can't prepare you for the reality of what criminal justice really means. So I know that's been a big passion of yours. And although you have roles different now, you've got to take a passion to the bench. I mean, now you have to be impartial, but how does the perspective change in where you're sitting now?
As you know, I was Bruce Bennett's assistant DA for 18 years, and in many ways, and many times, I say he was my mentor. And he told me when I got elected, he welcome from stage left to stage center, and it was a reference to to a theater. But I think your perspective changes, Parker. And one thing that I have taken from being on the bench 10 years that maybe you don't have the ability to do unless you've been on the bench 10 years, or maybe you do, but I just wasn't smart enough to know this. You tend to become monovision as a defense attorney or monovision as a prosecutor, and you don't see the whole picture. And I had the privilege, and maybe the greatest thing that I've ever done is in the practice of law as a judge was the 3 or 4 years that I served as a drug court judge, of watching people transform their lives. And during that process, I had been a prosecutor 20 years. I had been on the bench a few years when I did it, but you just recognize that there's so much that goes into that outcome that doesn't come out in a courtroom. And as a judge, I think it's important that you have as broad a base of knowledge as you can. And I say this in courtrooms on a regular basis, and it's a little bit tongue in cheek, but there's truth in it to it. I would rather you be a taxpayer than a tax burden. I would rather figure out how to give you the incentives or the skills to successfully navigate life. But if you continue to choose to navigate it in an lawful manner, don't expect freedom if you're in Division A.
Right. Well, that's a wonderful take on that. And you're right about how we have to have a certain balance with taxpayers versus burdens. And, it's almost an accounting problem at the end of the day, right? We've got to pull some people out of this side of the ledger and put them over there, or the whole thing just doesn't balance and work, And drug court is a great problem. I think Judge Sledge now runs that. Am I right?
She does. Erica took over for me about a year or so ago.
And I hear she does a wonderful job. She's taking the baton from you and running with it. But that's important work, because I understand you judges volunteer for that post. You don't have to do it. That court doesn't have to exist. It's something y'all do extra. But we all have people in our lives that struggle with addiction. We all have somebody probably in our family, certainly in our periphery, and that's a big part of crime. Speaking of people in our life, I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to go back and talk about some of the people in your life that have been inspirational to you. You mentioned, for example, your family furniture store. And I've heard you over the years as a friend mention many times lessons you learned from that experience and in that world. But whether we're talking about Judge Bennett, or we're talking about family, or whomever, who are some of the people before you hit the bench, before you kind of made the big time, so to speak, that helped you get there? Coaches, teachers, etc. who comes to mind as folks that you're grateful for now when you look back at your career?
Sometimes I think my success is in spite of me, Parker. But I truly, because as you know, as a friend and people who know me that are watching this or will see this, I mean, I have fallen flat on my face on more than one occasion in some regards in my personal life.
We all have, Judge. You're not alone there.
They've been navigation. They've been turning points for me, and I feel bad for the mistakes I made, and I certainly feel bad for who I made them with. But the truth is a lot of the good that Jeff Johnson is today is a result of those things. But I have and my friends call me morbid to say this, but I have kind of what I call a pallbearers list, and that's just a group of people that are in my life that if I were to pass right now, that I would want to participate in my funeral for me. So I think that's who you're referencing. One of the first name comes to mind is a guy named Bob Dyke. He was the pastor here at First United Methodist Church for years and years. He's retired now, lives in Ruston. So when I go visit my mom, I usually have breakfast or lunch with Bob. But he saw me through my first divorce and taught me what it was to really try to overcome our shortcomings and improve. And he's been a mentor and a voice for me anytime I've ever needed him. Another local guy that some people are going to know that you would not maybe think is on that list, but it's a guy named by the name of Barry Hoover. Barry Hoover's just was a general repairman for years and years and years. I talked to Barry this week, but just a good man that has always stood by me and been there for me, and just given me some insights, through some of his struggles, legal struggles, about what it's like to take the high road, even when you may not be, you're not sensing that you're getting it. Bruce Bennett obviously is one of those guys from a legal perspective and also from a friend perspective. The thing I probably take from him is he told me I would rather be right than affirmed, as you know, and if our rulings are not what somebody may like in a courtroom, they can appeal it. And Bruce, I think, taught me that you have to seek equity and justice in the outcome in the context of the law. Obviously I'm required to follow the law, but I need to keep in mind what looks right based on these facts from an equity and a justice standpoint. So those would probably be three. My father was a tremendous influence on me. He passed when I was 30, but he had a tremendous impact and influence on me, and I still think about him on a regular basis. Sometimes I look upstairs and say, I know you're proud right now. And sometimes I look upstairs and say, just hang on, it's going to get better. So those three or four people probably. I know that there's others that I'm missing. I feel like I'm thinking people at the Grammys.
Everybody,
those are some basics. Yeah.
Yeah, and you've got a strong North Star, in your father and these men, and it's so important to have people that provide accountability in our lives. I think probably especially so when you reach a summit of power as you have. I was, in my office today, I was blessed with the opportunity to sit down with three of my oldest friends, two of my best friends that I see, because they're around here, Chad Richard and Will Richardson. But our friend Jay Barbier, who's now a preacher in Tennessee, was in. And Jay's been through all these struggles in recent years with cancer and all this. And, we keep up via Facebook and all. But he was mentioning his accountability group. Now, what they do that's pretty cool, you may want to get this with some of your buddies. They actually pick like a Monday night football game. And so they go all over the country once a year. And I guess that maybe that's a way to sell a Monday night football trip to your wife if it's your accountability group. But it's so important because we can all get off track, right? And it's tougher to make a friend in your 40s, in your 50s, especially once you become a judge or a millionaire or whatever, than when you're young. And so these people you talk about, many of whom you just kind of came up with that saw you struggle as a young father, through divorce, et cetera. That's super important. So I appreciate you sharing that candor with us because I know, in a public forum, not everybody's brave enough to do that. Let me ask you, and I don't want to get too personal because that's not the place here, but I know what a dedicated father you are to your three boys. I've seen you kind of father them from the courts at PYB out at Parb, through Ponchatoula High School, and now they're beyond. What lessons in fatherhood did you take from your own dad? Did you learn elsewhere? If you were speaking to a new father, whether it's in your court or, this weekend at a party, what would you share that you've learned about being a dad?
I think first off, you have to love them. and you have to let them know you love them, and you have to let them know that when they act human, that you still love them, that you love them when they score the final bucket, and you love them when they skipped or they got caught cheating on a test. That love is not conditioned upon a certain thing. The other two things, which maybe aren't as popular to say, is I think you got to hold them accountable. I think that
Absolutely.
you have to set the bar high, and then you have to enforce it. And the reason for that is because if they don't learn to do it for themselves, nobody is in this society. And so that's a balance. I mean, I think love is what overcomes that. Obviously our Savior teaches that, and I think it's so vital is that I was able to demand a lot out of my children, sometimes too much, certainly, but because they knew at the end of the day that their dad loved them and still does. And it's free. Love costs nothing.
Right.
I mean, that doesn't. You don't have to be wealthy or poor to provide love. And when you provide that to your child consistently, I just think at least for me, I think it's the most important component of being a parent.
Yeah, and it provides that foundation, and then they know later, because you alluded to, they're going to mess up. They're humans like we are. They're sinners like we are. They're going to sin, but they need to know that they have that path back to you that's rooted in this unconditional love that you speak of. So that's a wonderful way to put it. Let me ask you about, inspirations in your life in terms of, for example, what inspired you to run for judge? I mean, you had a lucrative practice, you're making a ton of money, you had a lot of powers in ADA, but what inspired you to do that? And looking back, what have you learned maybe that might change the perspective on that big decision you made to take the bench?
Yeah, I think that I would like to have a sexier reason, but I think the truth of it is Parker, I was in some ways burned out. I was the practice of law had become a little bit burned out on. I still enjoyed prosecuting, but family law was trying. Real estate had become really not contentious, but very legalistic. I mean, there were just many new laws being introduced each and every year, and there was good guys like you moving in 2 blocks away that were taking my cases away. So I had to expand and maybe reevaluate how I would do it. So I think the timing was right. Bruce Bennett was the one that suggested that I do it. I'd been his assistant for 18 years. I had really never envisioned being a judge, but he kind of imposed on me that I had the experience from a civil and criminal perspective, and that I think because he knew we saw each other on a weekly basis, that maybe he sensed that there was some time for a change. But it was truly, I think, a God thing in this sense. All the things that I had learned in 20 years were not for naught. They were immediately transferred and built upon as a judge. I was able to, I think that the nature of my practice allowed me to be in a courtroom as often as almost anyone in this district, between being a DA and having a family practice and motion practice. So I got to continue what I had maybe developed best in my career and then build on it.
Well, let's chat about how the different aspects of the career, the civil, the criminal, the real estate, et cetera, play into the court, beginning with, describe the role of the district court, that you work in, because I don't think everybody has the view that you do criminal, you do civil. And what do we mean by civil? Not just the car wrecks that I handle or the real estate disputes that Jeff Leisure may handle, or, there's just this great breadth of things. And we live in an era where sometimes people take the bench without the broad experience that you mentioned. And I'm not here to say you have to do all the things you did to be a good judge, but I remember when I was clerking in federal court, there were judges appointed that had never tried a single case. And there was chatter about whether that was kind of the right thing to do or not. What's your take on how that experience has benefited you? And what of it do you think is the most essential when we're picking our judges?
I think certainly my time in the courtroom benefited from me, and having done it in multiple districts benefited me in this sense. I got to see a lot of different judges. The nature of, I was exposed to, probably before I became an elected judge, I mean, I would assume 30, 40 judges that I appeared before, and probably a dozen or so of those on a pretty regular basis. So in this sense, it'd be like an assistant coach on Nick Saban's staff who becomes a head coach. He gets to watch Nick Saban and what he does, and then he gets, obviously, let's take the guy at Georgia. He's taken what he's done and made it good. So you have that opportunity that maybe somebody who doesn't spend as much time in court to see what works and what doesn't work, and then to modify that and make it your own and put your own stamp on it. So certainly that's I think a benefit. At the end of the day, Parker, you know this, maybe the general public doesn't know this. One of the most nervous things I was when I first began practicing law is what if my client asked me a question I don't know the answer to? Because I think you have this belief that you should know all the answers, right?
Right. It's funny.
I'm very comfortable saying now I don't know that, but I will find it out. Yeah.
Well, we sit, you and I both in front of all these books. I mean, you're in front of law books and I'm in front of other books. And I remember early in my career realizing that my clients sometimes expected me to have read all of those. And really what law school did was train us on how to find the answer. And sure, if you become a specialist, as I have in one thing, I better know everything there is to know about 18-wheeler wrecks and car wrecks. Heck, it's all I do. But I still don't know everything, even about that narrow niche, because there's new law being written every day. But you're right. It's hard to get to that comfort level where you can kind of own up to that. But frankly, it's not until you hit a level of gravitas, right? Because when you're young, they'll fire you for not knowing the answer. Right. Once you become kind of the man, they'll keep you. But I want to share here, we got a comment coming in, and this is going to go back a few topics. But we're talking about court. Now we're talking about the master of another court, Marshall Graves, who knows a ton about raising kids like you do and has raised 3 of the best basketball players to ever come out of Ponchatoula. Amen. But Marshall, good to hear from you, buddy. This is one of my dearest friends. And he says you're a concerned parent, and our kids become motivation for accountability, and they will want you to practice what you preach. And that's an excellent point, Marshall. And Judge, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think I read a book a long time ago when I was learning how to be a parent. I can't remember the author of it, but one of the things that he said is if you're not willing to suffer with the punishment that you impose for your kids, don't expect your kids to suffer it. I mean, for example, when you ground a kid, that means that you take away their phone. In today's world, there's a consequence to you for that, because parents in a large part rely on those kids' phones to motivate them.
That's the babysitter.
As the babysitter, I mean, truly. But so I think Marshall's point is well taken. Is when that kid sees it's important enough to you to give up, then at some point, even if they don't verbally do that, they will at least mentally sign off on the fact, okay, this is worth giving up on.
Yeah. Excellent point. Marshall's got another good one here. And I assume, Marshall, this relates to the question that we had. We talk about how lawyers don't like the getting the questions we don't know the answers to. He says preachers feel the same way about those questions.
Yeah, well, Marshall, you know this, Parker, but Marshall may know this, but I give the message at Victory Christ in Springfield once a month, and so maybe I'm both. I'm not sure which one I am. I may be inadequate at both of them. So I agree that I think that the preachers are onto something that maybe we should all listen to a little bit more.
Well, let's talk about your court itself. And I don't know, you don't have to give us, for example, percentages, but what all are you covering? You got criminal, you've got civil. Some people still don't know that family now has, dedicated judges, and they're no longer part of that same general mix as they were when you and I were coming up. So when we hear district judge, Division A, 21st Judicial District, what does that encompass?
Yeah, so I'm what we call a general court judge, which means I can hear anything, but by statute or by local rule, we've decided to have some specialty courts. So juvenile has been excluded for me. Family court's been excluded for me. Judge Burris, who's been here a couple of years, and the seat that will be elected in November will take, handles a good bit of misdemeanor and traffic court. So for me, what that looks like now is probably, and I don't have exact percentages, Parker, but I'd say between 60 and 65% criminal, and the other 35 to 40% civil. Criminal is anything from, a misdemeanor to a capital murder, and everything in between. Civil is it can be real estate, it can be personal injury, it can be contract disputes, it can be successions. In fact, I heard a trial this morning, a bench trial they were trying to have a donation rescinded. So it's very broad in the sense that anything civil other than family law comes to me. It can be evictions. It can be, just anything that you can think of in the regards to civil falls under my jurisdictions, with the exception of family court and community property, which falls under family court.
So, what motivates you to do a great job as a judge? Because, you guys run every 6 years, and frankly, most of you don't get opposition once you get elected. It's often a hard fight to get the job, and you had to campaign hard to get it. But after that, while I know you would never take anything for granted or say that you're a shoe-in, many of us outside, looking in, view it that way. So when you don't have a boss, when you don't have a client yelling at you, wanting to, you don't have a boss telling you you've got to do this, how do you wake up and motivate yourself to achieve greatness in your job?
I feel a sense of responsibility to the people that put me there, and a sense of responsibility just to my Lord and Savior, just to do things to the best of my ability. I think that people that know me, I try to work very efficiently. I would rather work hard less than less more. So, and I also have understood from my own, I guess, weaknesses, that if I'm prepared, not only does it go better, but the result is better, because I'm not trying to figure out what I need to know, and I can just listen to what's being said. And I know that most people think judges write, but district judges don't do a lot of writing. I'm not a big fan of writing. So I would prefer, and 90% of the time or more, I give my decision in court and give my reasons verbally for that, for a couple of reasons. One is I think that that's what you elect me to do. But two is, I think the winners and losers should hear from the person that's saying that. I think it can be a way of us escaping our responsibility. If you just spent 2 days trying a case in front of me, would you really like for me to take it under advisement 4 weeks and then give you a written opinion where you lost? I mean, I don't think that fairly, and everybody has their different opinion, and I'm not judging what other judges do by any means, but for me, I think the right thing to do is to look at the lawyers and look at the clients and say, here's what I believe, here's why I believe it. And if you don't agree with it, you're welcome to see if Baton Rouge disagrees with me, which they do,
right.
Which they do.
And I tell you what, and what's great about that too is you get the answer right away. You may not like the judgment you receive. It may not go your way, but what would Martin Luther King say? Justice delayed is justice denied. And so often when we're waiting for written reasons, and you judges have plenty of great reasons on why you can't always get a written order out right away. People don't understand you'll have duty courts. Sometimes you're up all night, hearing applications for warrants and, all kinds of things that you have to do outside of the courtroom we don't know about. But I worked for and clerked for a judge that liked to rule from the bench. Not all judges did that, but I'm a fan of it. I think it's good. And of course, you can always go ask for written reasons later. We may not get them, but we can always ask. But,
honest to goodness, what I generally tell them, as Parker, is that if you want written reasons, get a transcript, because I just gave them to you.
I like it. Well, and that's the other thing. You guys at the state court level, especially in our district, we're not a rich part of the state. Y'all don't have the resources that federal judges have. Your classmate, our friend Daryl, he's got 2 law review nerd. I don't mean to impugn them as nerds. I am a law review nerd, but he's got 2 highly educated clerks that are typing away and writing all day. You guys are often in the position of sharing clerks, and you don't have a big staff that you can dictate to.
I think there's certainly truth to that. And the other thing that I didn't see, look, it's never going to be fresher than at the end of the case. And things that you may think important, no matter how hard you try to take notes or whatever, if you go back 2 or 3 weeks from then, you're just not going to have as good assessment of what transpired over that period of time as you do right when it's there. I usually take a few minutes before I give those reasons just to collect my thoughts. Probably not dissimilar to what lawyers do before giving their closing arguments, but it's just been my experience that I perform better doing it that way.
So let's chat a little bit, if you would, about you in terms of the Jeff Johnson you are versus maybe the way people see you. What might surprise people about you, or another way to put that would be, what's misunderstood about you, if at all? Do you think people would be surprised to kind of get to know you personally, that only view you as a judge? Or
yeah, I don't know what people think of me, so I don't know that I can really answer that question.
Poorly worded question.
I guess if they like me, they go get confirmation that that's right.
I guess the simpler way to put it is just what might surprise people about you?
I think in a lot of ways, I'm just kind of a country guy. I like to hunt. I absolutely love to shoot. I get out to Covey Rise and shoot sporting clays as often as I do. as often as I can, I should say. I mean, you know this. I love my children. I spend as much time as I can
Right.
with them. And it's been a while since we talked. I don't know if you know this, but my oldest is married and is well. I'm expecting my first grandchild
Oh,
next year.
wow. No, that's all
So
news to me. It's been a
you know,
while. Congrats.
I'm trying to get used to being the fact that I'm that old. Um, I
That's
love
cool.
LSU.
Mhm.
You know, and I love to talk about the things that Brian Kelly could have done better or should have done better, like everyone else. So I think in many ways, you know, they may have this image of what a lawyer is or what a judge is, but I think I'm a pretty normal guy and do a lot of the same things that what we would consider normal people do.
Well, I promise you, before we went on the air that I'd be respectful of your time and try to get you out of here, pretty quickly. And so we're not at the end all the way, but we're nearing that. But before we do get to the actual end, what do you view, your future is like? I mean, you've had several kind of great careers in one. You're only 10 years into a career on the bench, but you have, even while being a judge, taken on extracurriculars. I know you've done the drug court, you've been involved working with other judges like Judge Morrison when he was there about legislation that affects the court. What can we expect out of you in the next 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to do this a while longer. You know, that's obviously dependent on the people giving me another term, but I want to do that at least one more term. I've established a nonprofit. I may have told you about it a while back. Design Relentless. Every Saturday morning about 7 a.m. I minister to a pastor in a couple of churches in Southwest Kenya. I'd like to grow that
Wow.
some.
Mhm.
That kind of is an outgrowth of the victims that I saw over the course of time that I was an assistant DA. And just very briefly, let me plug it if you allow me. Just that
Please.
we're all made in the image of God, and that if we were designed in His image, and you look at how Jesus went to that cross and how relentless He was, that we are overcomers. And I think that so much of what we see in the news and the media, and really what I see in a courtroom, is the tragedy of life. And so, Design Relentless is from a Christian perspective, trying to show that how people have overcome tragedy and how people have overcome circumstance and used God as a base to do that. So that's something that I've had mulling around for a couple of years. It's like a glacier moved forward, but over the course of the next several years, I would like to dedicate more time to that and get some people that I've been blessed to be involved with over the course of time, get them to share their story, maybe as an inspiration to not only, maybe as a tribute to what they've done for themselves, but also an inspiration to others that are similarly situated.
So, Judge, how can we help there? Because, like, for example, at Rotary today, David Peavy was a guest, and he got up there and talked about this great program he's got, also like yours, faith-based, that's helping people in India. They had a website in that instance where we could log on and donate. I don't know if you're that far along with your project. If so, please let us know. We'll put it in the comments. But how can we get involved and help, whether it's through volunteering, donations? What do y'all need, and how can we help?
Yeah, I think what you could probably do, Parker, is put a foot in my butt and honestly get me to get up and get moving. And then once that occurs, all those things could follow. I have designs for a web page and a Facebook page before the end of the year. Ultimately, I'd like a YouTube channel that in some way can get promoted as an avenue for these people to share their stories in the context of interviews and then follow that up with maybe a blog or in the comments talk about what Christian principles and what Christian what Bible verses or what Bible principles were in play for those people during the course, maybe some shadows of their life.
Well, I'll be happy to help you there, but I'll tell you, it's going to be a do as I say, not as I do situation, because our buddy Daryl, his son Jude's been working for me for like a year, and we talked to the Rotary Club last year about how we plan to have Ponchatoula.com online like by the end of the year, and here we are. We're not there yet.
That's
So
right. Yeah, but we're
sometimes,
deadline driven. Our profession is deadline driven, and it's
right.
so hard to have I'm not good at establishing for myself. So, but it is. I can tell you this: it's never gone away, and little by little, it's moving forward. So I'm confident that at some point, it'll be something of merit, not for me, but for the people that maybe I get to promote and the stories that I get to promote.
So we're going to close out with a question about advice you might give somebody young. And you can answer this on several fronts. So if you'd prefer to speak to a young lawyer who aspires to have a great career similar to yours, or if you just want to talk to a young person who needs to, in any profession, avoid problems and overcome mistakes they make whatever. But before we go, what advice might you give to a young Jeff Johnson if you were talking to that 22-year-old soon to be expectant father who's your son's age, or just any young person in need of advice? What comes to mind is what you'd like to share before we close out?
Yeah, I think what I would tell myself in this regard is that have the courage of conviction to do what your conscience tells you and not what your ego needs. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is I can only speak to my own journey, right? Most of the times that I fell in the ditch had to do with insecurities that I was trying to compensate for, and rather than just listen to the things that I knew were true deep down, but tried to prove their truth from something outside of myself. And what that basically boils down to this, Parker, is have integrity. That have the integrity to do the right thing. And I speak of him as a man that has, on occasion, not had integrity, very honestly. So I speak from a place of conviction that if I had it to do over again, I would have tried to learn that lesson a lot quicker and a lot better than I did. Yeah. I tended to have to grab the fire and just hold on to the darn thing and let it burn me for a while before I got it. But I think so many young people that are type A are anxious to prove themselves, but you can't abandon integrity in the context of trying to prove yourself. So that would be the message I think that I would give me. But I would say at 22, I wasn't smart enough to hear it because honestly, it was given to me. It was given to me.
Few people are, but that's profound, and I admire your candor because that can be helpful to so many people. So, final question: is there anything else on your heart, on your mind, anything else you want to share with our listeners and our viewers before we go?
Yeah, not really. I mean, you and I have spoken a little bit. I guess what I would like to say is that, and this is of import to a lot of the people, you listeners. I've had the fortune of handling the flood case. I'm very proud that we just made a second distribution, which is very, very rare in the context of class action cases that people Absolutely. Get second distributions. And I think we're in a position to where we've managed that money, that there may be an opportunity to do something more with a little bit that's left, and that's coming to a conclusion within roughly a year of the time that it was funded. So wow. I'm proud of that, and I'm happy for people who my kids grew up with hearing about that we were able to effectuate that for them.
That's amazing. And for folks that weren't around and don't know, this is the flood from 1983. The lawsuit was literally filed when you and I were little kids. And, I wouldn't even know how many judges handled it before it got to you. But I think about some of my heroes in life. Mr. Hollis Poche comes first to mind, and he's one of many, and he's long passed away. But some of the best men and women in Ponchatoula were profoundly affected. The devastation from that flood. And it's so neat that you guys are able to kind of bring that thing, land that plane, so to speak.
Yeah. And everybody needs closure, right?
Yeah, they absolutely. And it looked impossible forever. So Judge Jeff Johnson, I thank you for your time. To all the people watching, from Marshall, who was kind enough to comment, to the others that are watching live, I thank you for sticking with us. We'll be back next week, same time, same place with Ponchatoula Live. Y'all take care.
Parker, thank you so much for having me.